Hello everybody, welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well, and today we're doing a box office breakdown for this past weekend, which saw Smile 2 get the #1 spot very easily this weekend and actually performed just about as well as the original Smile film from back in 2022 after the success of that movie, which was not expected to do the amount of numbers that it ended up doing. Very much fast-tracked a sequel, and it looks like, based off of how well this film is doing, a third film and a third installment in the franchise that is now the Smile franchise likely will happen not too long from now, I would imagine, maybe even within the next couple of years, because Smile 2 is indeed performing very, very well. They increased the budget by about $10 million this time around to about maybe a $28 million budget. And even though they have not made their money back yet, they are definitely on pace to be able to do so very, very quickly. So kudos to the team behind the film, to Paramount for distribution, and just to everyone else involved, because they seem to have yet another box office winner on their hands. Now, exactly where this film ends up in comparison to the first, only time will be able to tell. We'll have to look at what the drop-offs are like from that first Sunday to Monday, and also, of course, what those week 2 drop-offs are like. But as of right now, things are looking pretty darn good. All the while, The Wild Robot continues to hold very strong, even though this movie has already gotten a PVOD release, so it's already available on digital platforms, and is going to be very soon available on other platforms as well. So the fact that that's already available, but people are still going out to see it, just shows you how strong this movie is and how strong these holds have been. This film has now easily crossed $100 million domestically. And also we'll talk about Terrifier 3 and a plethora of other films. And so we'll just go ahead and dive straight into the news, with Smile 2, of course, being that #1 film at $23 million, $6,300 per theater. So very, very strong showing here. As a comparison, if we look back to the first Smile movie, that movie had an opening of around $22 million before you adjust for inflation. When you do adjust for inflation, the first Smile only made another $160,000 total in comparison to this. So even though Smile 2 has clearly not doubled its audience or increased its audience by any means, and if you compare ticket prices, especially between now and back in 2022, though the difference in price is not huge, it is still enough to where less people have gone to see Smile 2 in comparison to the first Smile. The fact that the difference, though, is very, very small shows that they've been able to retain their audience, maybe even bring some new people out as well. And I've heard some pretty good reactions to the film so far, and so I think that it probably will be able to have a pretty decent run at the box office, especially in this month of October, where the spooky season tends to be, where these horror films like it are able to do quite well. So kudos to them. It is still not broken even, but it is definitely on pace, I think, to be able to do so pretty easily in the case of Smile 2. The Wild Robot at $10.1 million, only dropping 28% after 4 weeks of release. So this film has been having consistent drops in that 20 to 30% range. That's a very, very good sign for the longevity of the film. As I mentioned in previous videos, the only thing that might be holding it back from doing something similar to what A Puss in Boots: The Last Wish was able to do back when that film came out, and that film had a very long run down the line, was the difference in the internationals. So even though there might be 1 or 2 markets where The Wild Robot has yet to release in, and there could be some money to be found in those markets, it is still quite clear that the numbers are not nearly as good internationally as they are currently domestically, and especially when you look at the holds, The Wild Robot is just completely decimating everything else within this space as far as what is currently making money at the box office directed towards these audiences. And so again, kudos to everyone involved. It's a very phenomenal movie in many ways. It's a very solid film, and I think most people will be able to enjoy it. It's a safe movie to bring your kids to, and there's not a whole lot of movies, it seems, these days that are able to actually do that and check off all those different boxes. So I would definitely recommend it being a film that you go and end up seeing, especially because you do not want to take your kids to see a film like Terrifier 3. Now, I have not seen this movie, but I think anyone can, just with any basic knowledge of the film, can tell you, yeah, this is not meant for kids. It's a non-rated movie, so clearly an R-rated style film, though it has not been officially rated because they went around the studio system. One of the many reasons why I support all of the things going on right now with Terrifier 3, because it shows, yeah, you don't need the studio system in either distribution or in production to be able to get a film into theaters and to be able to do quite well with this. This film, over $3,300 per screen, and also adding 248 screens this weekend. So in the second weekend of release, it added 248 screens, and it still only dropped 51%. Now remember, typically when we see movies like this, where there's a lot of momentum going towards it, there's a lot of excitement amongst the fan base, a dedicated fan base at that, typically you see everyone shows up opening weekend, and then no one shows up second weekend. You typically see a massive drop-off. 51% drop for a movie like this is very, very good, right? This ultimately means that you have a lot of people still seeing it for the first time, a lot of people maybe even seeing it multiple times, and so therefore that kind of a hold is just darn good. This film could easily track to get over $50 million domestically, which is very impressive on about a $2 million budget, spending about only $1 million on marketing, which is your typical spend, about, again, 1.5 times your budget is your total spend. So we're talking about a total spend of around $3 million on this movie. For them to already be at $36 million domestically, not to mention their international takes, this film making lots of money, especially if you look at the percentages of where it compares to its budget, probably going to be one of the most successful films of 2024. Kudos to everybody involved with that project. Beetlejuice still hanging around as well. 32% drop there after 7 weeks of release, still making money. We Live in Time from A24 got a bump up in its release. So obviously it was in 5 screens last weekend, and so adding 980 screens means you're going to have a 1,000, almost 700% increase. Again, that's just because you're adding the availability of the film. To say the film is a huge success or not, again, A24 typically make lower budgeted movies, but their lower budgeted films also tend to make a lot less because they're much more limited in their release. That per screen ratio is still pretty good, $4,250. That's obviously a lot more than The Wild Robot, Terrifier 3 even, and not too far behind the likes of A Smile 2, which is a new wide release. But again, always take that with a grain of salt because those movies probably don't end up making a lot of money theatrically. Most of that money probably comes after the fact when they sell the rights to whatever streaming platform they go to, and on physical media sales and things of that nature. Again, A24 is kind of its own individual beast, but ultimately, to say this film is doing well or not is really hard to say at this point in time. Joker 2, we can say, speaking of films not doing well, that this film is a complete failure, right? We had that massive 81+% drop the first to second weekend, and now the second to third weekend, seeing another almost 70% drop. And also, Warner Brothers has already dropped it from 1,200 screens after 3 weeks. Remember, this is also a film that's already gotten its VOD release date, is probably going to, if it hasn't already gotten an HBO Max release date. I mean, we're talking about a movie that has been a catastrophic failure on every single level, and the only thing that anyone could even say or even think of saying positively is the internationals, but even those have not been all that good either. So yeah, this is just awful news for them. $2.1 million. This film has already been making, and it did not take long. It was like 2 weeks in, it finally started to make less than $1 million a day. For a movie like this, that should not be happening. But the fact that this film obviously has turned off so many fans, is only at $56.4 million. I mean, we're talking about a movie that's going to struggle to get to $70 million domestically. And yeah, couldn't happen to a nicer film, clearly made for its audience and didn't hate on its audience whatsoever. It's not going to have consequences for anyone, I'm imagining, who are part of the project, especially in the creative part of the project itself. Piece by Piece, a documentary using Legos, dropping 45%, so not a terrible drop off there. $2.1 million, still not the biggest of moneymakers in the world, but documentary using Legos. Again, interesting dynamic there. I don't really see the difference in overall take being that much different, but again, when it comes to documentaries, especially in the modern world, hard to really quantify those, especially when you add in the Lego piece to it. Number 8 spot goes Transformers 1, still holding on pretty strong, though clearly nearing the end of its run after only 5 weeks of release. This movie, again, just did not do exactly what it needed to do theatrically. Post-theatrical, probably has a chance of making some money. But as of right now, the film's still set to be a flop. Saturday Night from Sony Pictures dropping 47% after 4 weeks of release. This film had a bit of a boost last weekend, I believe it was, where it was able to get to more screens. And so, again, whether to say this is film a success or not, these films tend to cost probably between $10 and $20 million. And so making only $7.6 million domestically is still not going to be enough to make that up down the road. But again, typically a film like this is also not looking to make a lot of money, though any film that gets released by a theater, by a studio, is going to want to make some money back. And so whether it does or not looking like that will be the case at this point, but anything could happen. And then rounding out the top 10 is Nightmare Before Christmas, the re-release. That's right, the re-release over at 1,860 screens. This actually got a re-release last week and was able to drop only 53%. So the fact that a film like this is still able to drive a lot of people out to the theater shows you just how really starved for content we are, but also just how much better the content was back in the 90s and early 2000s especially. Going into the international numbers here, we got Smile 2 at $46 million total, so very, very impressive. And as I had mentioned before, it is still tracking about where the first film did, so kudos to them. Maybe word of mouth, especially if the word of mouth continues to be positive, might be able to push this along and to have a similar run as that first film did. Keep in mind that when it came to the first film, it actually ended up having quite a bit of a run there. So if you look at the numbers according to thenumbers.com, unadjusted for inflation, you have a global worldwide total of $217 million for the first Smile back in 2022. The thing that I found the most interesting, though, was that it was definitely the word of mouth on this movie that helped it out quite a bit. You go ahead and look at the box office here, where it opened and then where it ended. It did so much better than any other film within that same historical framework. Only dropped 18% from first to second weekend. I don't think that's going to happen for this movie. I think that ultimately that first movie was able to get enough of that initial interest out because of its marketing campaign. And then because the film ended up being better than what people thought, it had a pretty good word of mouth. And so people were able to convince others to go and see it. I don't think you're going to have that same level for this current one. And so I'll be interested to see what the drop-off is like next weekend, especially at this time of year where you have, again, not a whole lot of films coming out. Again, a lot of films are set to come out more so in the November's release schedule slot. And so right now we've got films like Exhibiting Forgiveness, Goodrich, Hocus Pocus, re-release, Smile 2, Rumors, We Live in Time. And then if we go over to our next weekend, we're looking at films like Conclave set to come out, Venom: The Last Dance. So that's going to be the biggest one. So probably going to take, I would say, a lot of people in that demographic that Smile 2 is going towards. So probably expect to have a much steeper drop-off week 2. But Venom: The Last Dance is going to be an interesting one as well because the films haven't been all that great, and yet they've been able to do well enough financially to justify their existence and to continue the franchise along. This seemingly being the last of the Venom films, at least dedicated as such from Sony. Be interesting to see if people have any nostalgia for that and have any desire to see the final run at this point. Going over to The Wild Robot, $196 million worldwide as of this recording, so almost $200 million. This film, as I mentioned, is doing much better domestically than internationally, but still doing well in all places, and we'll talk about what the actual overall loss to, potential loss versus potential gains that this film is currently at. Terrifier 3 at $38.8 million. Obviously not much of international presence here, but still very impressive domestic numbers. $2 million budget. This film, truly insane. Right now it's made 19.4 times its budget. So just to give you an idea, typically when we talk about big budget films doing well financially, even they are only able to get to maybe 4 to 5 times their budget. Maybe in a very strong scenario, they get to like the 9s and 10s. The fact that this film's at 19.4 and the film is still going shows you just how strong this film's performance is. It may not be so in raw box office, but when you remember what kind of film this is and how much it costs to make, this is just darn impressive no matter how you try to spin it. Beetlejuice also very impressive as well, making over $434 million as of the recording of this video. We Live in Time at $4.5 million, Andrew Garfield, Florence Pugh film. You have also Joker Folie à Deux not getting to only at $191 million. Also, to give you an idea of how much this film has just completely plummeted from its opening weekend. Typically, films that open to around that amount of $37 million tend to be in a $108 to $75 million range. It's only at 56, so not likely going to make any money back, and also likely to be one of the biggest box office flops of the year. With that, again, only numbers coming for the international market for this movie, but even then, it's still not anywhere close to what ended up being $800+ million or so from the internationals when you adjust for things like inflation. Piece by Piece at $7.6 million. Again, it's doing okay. Transformers 1, $119 million on paper. That looks okay, but $119 million versus a $75 million budget, you need to make between 2.5 and 3 times your budget, depending on where you're making money. This film's not anywhere close to that. It will not be able to do so theatrically. Saturday Night's doing okay, but again, not making much money back. And Night Before Christmas, this of course is the entire run of the film. Interesting that it's only made around $93 million. Obviously, when you adjust for inflation, that would change. But also, even when you adjust for inflation, still wouldn't be the biggest of releases in the world. So shows you just how much home video and DVD and VHS and those releases were so much more palatable and so much more powerful back in the day compared to where things are now. So let's go over to the charts because we love charts here on OMB Reviews. And let's talk about some things. So first off, we can make some projections for Terrifier 3. So Terrifier 3 having made $38.8 million as of this video. And after the first 2 weeks of release, means that if it's based off of the typical historical trend of most movies, it should make between $55 and $77 million worldwide by the end of its run. So obviously this is one of those films where take that with a grain of salt. This film could obviously make a lot more money worldwide, at least as far as like the domestic numbers are concerned. So, never sleep on a movie like this, but it's still doing pretty well. I would imagine though next weekend with Venom: The Last Dance coming out, that will probably gobble up a lot of the box office there. For us, our overall profits are concerned, between $30 and $43 million would be your typical profits. But remember, this film is, costs very little, but also is getting the vast majority of its money from the domestic, and so its take home is going to be a little bit higher than other films. So as of right now, it's made $17 million in net profit, and that will continue to go up. And just as a reminder, this is still a massive return on investment when you think about how much money was spent on the actual film itself, and especially when you compare that to other films, that have also gotten released in a similar way, or even bigger budgeted films that have not been able to do that well percentage-wise, or even non-percentage-wise thinking. Piece by piece, this film made $7.6 million as of right now, so 10.8 to 15 million is the likely end range, losing between 17 and 14 million, so it looks like Piece by Piece will indeed be a financial failure, a financial flop, though not the worst of the year by any means, enough to be where maybe they could make some of that up in in VOD sales and streaming sales down the road, potentially. The Apprentice, that's right, the TDS film, and I know that some people have tried to defend it as being much better than that, and that's kind of a gross oversimplification. Basically, any film that's going to try to tell the story of the Orange Man is going to have some type of bias to it, focusing on certain elements of his life that, sure, you could say that many of us already know about these elements, but the fact that you're telling this story, reminding people about this, and releasing it at a time when you are, a couple weeks out from the election, you have to think of yourself, okay, even if you could give the best defense of the movie as a movie, you can't deny the fact that the film being made as it is, being released as it currently is, has probably something specific in mind. And guess what? No one is going to see this movie. So as of right now, projected to only make between let's see here, between $5 and $7 million by the end of its run. There's a loss of around $20 million and probably a little bit more if you think about the actual return on investment for films these days. And so a box office flop for The Apprentice, and can't say I'm too saddened by that or too surprised by that. Now, with Smile 2 at $28 million there, it only needs to make between $70 and maybe $85 million to break even. As of being at $46 million, it's currently around $20 million in the red. I imagine that it'll probably cut that, in half, if not more, by the end of next weekend. The big question is ultimately going to be is how much money does Venom: The Last Dance make? Is it able to get to the heights that are currently being projected? To give you an idea of this, Smile 2 obviously is performing about as well as had been anticipated. The Wild Robot also performing about as well. Terrifier 3 overperformed, at least according to the box office theory chart, but he does now have some numbers here for a couple of the future releases on schedule. And for Venom: Last Dance, right now, it's projected to make only between 45 and 72. Now, I remember it wasn't long ago that this movie had projections upwards of like $75 to $100 million. This has dropped a lot, right? As you can see, 29% drop from the last update. So about a week's worth of updates based off of the pre-sales of this. It's dropped quite a bit. So right now, Box Office Theory, not thinking that movie is going to be the biggest of moneymakers in the world. If this film ends up increasing its tracking, right? If we see pre-sales tick up, if we see that word of mouth, if the film ends up being good or at least entertaining like the other films have, because the other films have not really been all that good, but has entertained enough people to bring people out to the theater, maybe we see that number tick back up again. But as of right now, it's not tracking in the direction that you would typically want to see a film like this. And that could ultimately impact exactly how Smile 2's numbers are at the end of the day. But as you all know, I always say when it comes to competition, there's definitely a factor that competition has to whether a film does better or worse. But ultimately, if a film is good, people will go to see it no matter what is out in the theater. That is just simply a matter of fact, a matter of basic economics, and we see this happen time and time again, especially in the world that we live in today, where there's already so few good films, so few entertaining films that are worth going to see. If people think that a film is worth going to see, they will go out of their way to actually go and see it. And so those are the numbers currently as they stand. What are y'all's thoughts? Do you think that Smile 2 is going to be able to have a strong second weekend hold? Do you think it'll make its money back by the end of next weekend? I think there's a chance out there, but obviously it's going to be a film that, whether it's in a week or two, will make its money back. The Apprentice, obviously a flop there. Y'all's thoughts about that piece by piece. Terrifier 3, the success of that film, thoughts on that, and also give an update here as well to The Wild Robot. So as you can see, this film, because of where it's making its money, is still only about $24 million in the red. And there have been some who saying, yeah, Wild Robot has no chance to make its money back because it just has to make that much more back, and because of where it's making its money in China or in the other international markets. Just remind everybody that this film is still tracking very, very well, right? Almost at $200 million. That means, as of right now, guess what? This film is about to be a chart breaker officially. Okay, so if we just go ahead and pull these numbers up one more time for The Wild Robot at $196 million, based off of your typical tracking of where it was after 2 weeks, this film, in a best case scenario, would have hit $200.8 million. This film is going to do that in the next day or two. So the fact that it's already going to have doubled its entire box office after the first 2 weeks of release tells you this film is going to track quite a bit more. This film also still has to be released in some countries. Let's go ahead and pull up the international here just to give an idea. Right now, it is the 20th of October. And so as far as releases, Japan is going to be that late release. And so Japan could potentially be a factor down the road, but this film would have probably made money back in VOD sales and streaming sales, etc. by then. But this film has now released in almost all countries except for the likes of Sweden. It just got recently released in the United Kingdom. And so I think the UK number especially. So this is a number where on this chart at least, there has not been an update to, but I imagine that the international now being a little bit closer to domestic has a lot to do with how it's doing in the UK. So look for the long-term run in the United Kingdom that this movie has. Look obviously at that potential for a wide release in Japan, even though it won't be until February. And again, I would still say take that with a grain of salt because it's not always a guarantee. Just because you get released in a market like Japan and you have a successful movie like this does not mean it's going to equate to box office sales. But obviously, we do have to keep those things into account. So right now, this film's tracking, I think, to maybe even be able to get upwards of $250 million plus at the box office. And if it's able to get to that number there, this film then would be able to get very, very close to its break even, right? Its break even point is at $195 million when you look at your typical box office, right? So it's already basically there. But if you remind everybody about this, and that's why you see in the chart here, there's one number that says it's made money back using an old school 2.5 multiplier, but remembering that most movies today need to make closer to 3 times because of where it makes its money internationally, where it only gets 40% of the box office cut there. And in China, where it only gets 25% of that cut, that's the reason why this number is very different than this number here. So again, where it's tracking right now, though, indicates I think both categories will be in the black when everything is said and done, but we'll continue to track that. Let me know your thoughts about that as well in the comments down below. If you like this video, smash that like button, live that fire button over at Odyssey, smash the rumble button as well. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Have a wonderful rest of your day, a blessed Sunday, and as always, God bless. And now for a huge special shout out to all of my Chosen of Valhalla members, starting off first with my people on Patreon, Father Luca Illick and Miss Martin Muses. Check out her YouTube channel by the same name, Miss Martin Muses. Also to my Subscribe Star people, Matt317. Check out his Twitch channel by the same name, Matt317. And also to the K-Man. Check out his website, xtheboundaries.co. And lastly to my YouTube member, Mr. Roy. Shout out to you, good sir. And if you want your name shouted out at the end of every live stream and video, check out the top link in the video description below where you get access to that. Also, you get access to a plethora of other things. You get your name listed at the end of every live stream and video, like you saw in those names that came up before this video started. And also access to a giveaways channel that I host over on the Discord server where I give away 4Ks, Steelbooks, Blu-rays, all kinds of stuff. So check that out if you're interested in that. Also, I have an exclusive podcast that I hold at least once a month, and it's always a good time, and you get extra bonus content with that also. So if any of that sounds interesting, again, check out that top link in the video description below. You guys are all amazing, and beautiful people. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and as always, God bless.